Hey, welcome to Our Defining Moments. I'm your host, Mary McClements. In this podcast, I talk with people about the split-second moments in their lives that sent them in directions that they never expected. From the woods of Vermont to the streets of San Francisco to the Camino de Santiago in Spain, you may be astonished by the chain reactions these moments have had not only for my guests, but for those around them. Hey, today on Our Defining Moments, we have the pleasure of talking with someone I've known for quite some time. Is probably one of the quickest-witted people I know. I met Candace when I was close to filing for divorce in 2005 for my now ex-husband. And she has recalled to me a few times how bedraggled I was. Is bedraggled a word? Is that like a Moira from Schitt's Creek word, or is that a real word?
It's somewhere in between.
Okay. How bedraggled I was when we met compared to soon thereafter. Candace is one of those friends who's seen me go through a lot of metamorphosis. And though I don't see her much, I know she's gone through some metamorphosis of her own these past few years and isn't looking bedraggled in the slightest. So Candace, thank you so much for being here today and for talking about your defining moment.
Hi, Mary. Thanks so much for having me. How long has it been? I think it was 2001 when I met you. Maybe
Was it?
2002. Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
it before kids?
After kids, because you were in the throes of separating. And
yeah. So
I
that
remember you were 36 because
Oh
I
my
remember
gosh, yeah.
being shocked that you were 36 because I was like, what? You know,
You look so old.
You're looking too old for your age. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, we worked on that. And honestly, you look 20 years younger now than you
I
did
know.
then.
Thank you. And right.
Yeah.
It's amazing what happens when you
Yeah.
change
When
your
you
life,
feel
as you know.
of yourself. I do.
Yeah. So that was probably 2005, 2006, because both my kids have been born at that time. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So what are the three most important things about yourself that you want to share?
I can give you a little history about myself.
Sure.
So I am from Rochester, New York. I have one brother and I have a single mom. And I moved a lot as a kid, went to lots of different schools and moved a lot as an adult until I actually came to Vermont, which I have settled. I've been here now, I think 25 years, 26 maybe. Yeah, my partner then, who became my husband, and I settled here, started a business. I'm a hairstylist, which is how I intermittently get to meet Mary.
Yeah.
And get to see parts of her life like that. I myself have two kids, and this has been my life since. Now I'm a Vermont.
Yeah. And I'm just recalling that our paths probably crossed in Colorado.
Yes, in Boulder. That's right.
30 years ago.
There in the early 90s too.
Yeah.
And have some similar friends, but never necessarily crossed each other.
I think we met. Yeah.
I think we too.
Boulder back then was kind of like Vermont is now, where everyone kind of knew each other and we all went to the same parties and all that. So yeah, very cool. And so
social media where you had to actually be in the same room.
Gosh, I miss those days. I miss that. I just interviewed I just interviewed somebody who does social media for her life and actually helps me with social media for Our Defining Moments and Take Passage coaching. And I said, God, I'm so glad somebody likes to do this because I can't stand it. Anyway, so social media is for some, not others. And and I miss the days when you actually knew what was going on in someone's life because you talked to them about it, not because you read it on their post.
Yeah. Or you met people because you all had to gather in one place, So there was still a chance to meet new people in your town, where I think a lot of times kids now, they know so many kids through social media. I think they run into each other all the time and recognize each other from a different platform,
Yeah. So you run a wonderful hair salon and you've had that business for quite a while.
Yeah, this will be 10 years now.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's so brave, and you've made it through some hard times with COVID and other things going on in your life. And so I really commend you. And I don't think of you as like a hair cutter or a hairstylist. Like, you're the hairstylist extra because, I don't know, you listen to people all day and you are, very personable. You're kind of part therapist, part whisperer of some sort.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And it fits you. It fits you, right?
Thank you. Yeah. I enjoy my job, being able to speak with all different kinds of people, especially people I wouldn't necessarily cross over with otherwise. I really enjoy that, and making people feel better about, how they present to the world is a good part.
Yeah. Nice. So from what I understand, the defining moment that you're going to share is something that a lot of people, I think over 50% of people in our world, not knowing your details, but go through. And so why don't you go ahead and share?
Okay, so I'm sure everybody has a lot of defining moments.
Everybody has a ton, right?
Yes, exactly. But this one was probably one of the most important, and maybe the most raw, and probably the most relatable. So I'm choosing the moment that I chose to leave my marriage and, walk away from the home that I built. And I wouldn't say my family, because I didn't walk away necessarily from them, but physically I did. That was really challenging, especially because I think the big thing is that people, have different views about marriage and monogamy. I'm from a divorced family, so I made a decision to, get married thinking that the difference between making it and not making it would be determination and
right. Oh my God, right?
Working harder and really wanting to raise kids in a full home who had the experience of, normalcy, what I perceived to be normal.
Right.
And deciding that, if I'm honest, I was a little judgmental about maybe my mom's decision and maybe, how she chose to live her life. But alternately, I wanted to stay together for my kids. And in my moment, I had been arguing a lot with my husband, and my daughter just came home from college and she really hadn't seen any of it. My son had. I tried really hard to keep that separate, but he could feel the change. But she'd been gone, so really she didn't know any different. Our lives had been pretty traditional. And so he started to be really verbally abusive to me, and he did that at different times. This was one of the the worst.
When your daughter had come back, he was okay.
Yes. And so, I tried to bring up a topic, that I thought would be safer with someone else in the room, and it wasn't. So it was a bad choice. And so it escalated, and it's not that I expected that she would defend me or respond at all. But, when I put myself in that position, I thought, if my parents started to be awkward like that, I would get up and remove myself. But she didn't. She just kind of sat there and waited for it to pass. Like it really wasn't any big deal. It was so hard for me to even get a word in. I finally was like, you're not even letting me speak. And he said, why would I let you speak when, everything you say is stupid?
Oh, God.
Which is like, kind of a childhood insult, but it's so core, like,
it hits to that child that's still inside of you. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so for me, I looked over at my daughter because my mouth just hung open. Like, what does a person say to that? And she was just casually, looking out the window, waiting for it to pass. And I realized, like, what I thought I was doing to help my family, to improve their lives, was actually hindering it. And I had to reevaluate all the decisions that I'd made and the examples that I was setting. And in doing so, had to disappoint almost everybody. But it was in that moment that I clearly realized that it would be a temporary disappointment, and that if I stayed, it would be, a greater disrespect to the whole situation, for lack of a better way to put it.
I think it's amazing how you have put this and like your thought process. And I want to go back to something that you said when you first started describing this. You said, I wanted to bring up like something that would be safe with another person in the room. And then you said that was a mistake. But how sad that you had to weigh, or, what would be good and what would be bad? What can I bring up? What shouldn't I?
Well, as a rule, when couples fight, I think they try not to fight in front of the kids. Yeah. And so sometimes people can get away with being very hurtful or demeaning. And then your kids will come in the room and, that will change. Like all of a sudden you're like, let's make dinner. How was school? And it just gets brushed aside. So in the nature of being a good parent, you're actually enabling a really unhealthy situation.
Right.
And so River brought it to a point to me that I hadn't actually been hiding, even from the person who wasn't here, enough to where she didn't think this was alarming behavior. And what would that
was like, so you being verbally abused was just normal, kind of everyday. This isn't out of the norm. Like, this is what I've grown up with.
It did not seem at all alarming, not even uncomfortable. I had no idea, to be honest with you. Right. And so, so I left. I didn't get in the car. I walked, I took a walk around the neighborhood. And at that point I did a lot of walking because, I think soul searching, whatever,
the
getting
issues
out.
in the tissue.
Exactly.
Moving around, things change, things come up.
I walked. Exactly. And I walked for a couple hours till my feet just hurt. And it was dark. It was getting dark. And I'm like, I got to go inside. And I would walk by the house and it was warm out. It was getting to be summer. So the windows were open and I could hear them chatting away and laughing and having a really normal night. And it was really difficult to, embark on going back into that normal night. Like I almost felt like I had done the wrong thing by leaving. And so I finally brought, the guts to come back into my house and, face the music. Yeah. And I walked in and nobody even acknowledged me. Like I was waiting for like the music and they pretended I wasn't there. Oh. And I realized that I was like, okay, like I'm done today. And I have to establish the strength, which is the mother of the family. And so that's what I've been doing ever since.
Wow. The story that you're telling is so visually visceral, right? It's like the hardest moments oftentimes turn out to be the best moments because I think that is what has happened for you. Your life has changed so drastically and you're a lot happier now. But before we get into that, thank you for sharing this. And like, it's hard to be vulnerable. And even though divorce is of the norm, it is the majority. We don't really talk about how
letting everyone down and like you feel like you're letting everyone down and people will view you differently. And to be honest, they do a little bit, people get a little uncomfortable with a single woman.
But, I know. I lived it for a long time. I get it. Totally get it.
But ultimately that's okay. It weeds out people that don't have real depth in that way anyway, for me.
Right. I just want to reiterate the fact that I so appreciate you being vulnerable to talk about this because even in the 21st century, it's so often still the mom's fault, the woman's fault.
And it was, I think, depending on how your partner is, then it gets spun around and it was my fault. And so everybody felt as though I had left him.
Right. I'm sure you're being gaslit.
Yeah. That's what happens if you get pushed out and then you get blamed for it. And it's really complicated. Yeah. And to be honest, very few people reached out, almost no one.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. And I get that.
I think a lot of women go through that. I think, I think it makes people really uncomfortable when you step out of the role that they've seen you in. Yeah. And they have to recategorize you. And I don't know that they're comfortable with that always.
Yeah. And I think there's a piece of, I'm guessing, I don't know, but I think there's a piece for some people who are staying in marriages that maybe aren't happy, that there's a little jealousy that you had the courage to do it. You know, and it's like, oh, fuck that, fucker.
Yeah. I think in the beginning, it really validates relationships because you really look miserable. They really can't function very well. And they're like, girl, like I am staying home, Yeah. But then like, maybe a year or so later when you start to feel and look younger and more like yourself and people recognize it, then they start to question.
Like, oh, that's what, Mm-hmm. And I think it's so fascinating. When I was prepping for this interview, I was thinking about the like, how do you know when you know? How do you know when you're done? And for some people, it's a long, It was long. Yeah. Because you're always trying. You have to know you've done all you can do. Right. And so
seriously,
Right. It's like, for some people, it's a long time. For some people, it's just not in love with you anymore. Quick decision. But trying, and the fact that your family was a family of divorce, and I think there's like, oh, I don't want that to be me also, because maybe there's a feeling of like, oh, I'm a failure if I get divorced, right?
I think generation of that, because a lot of 70s kids, we were the first divorced kids, and people, really did a lot of divorcing in the 70s and 80s,
It's so fascinating. I can't think of a single friend in like middle school, high school that had divorced parents. Like I didn't know anyone whose parents were divorced.
Oh, really? Almost everyone I knew. I only have one or two friends.
Yeah. Anyway, so that
it's
like
wild. And it is over 50% now. I mean, it is. Like marriage is below 50% now in our country.
Wow.
Which is wild. Yeah.
And I think second marriages, an even higher percentage, which I find fascinating. Like, I think people realize they get married a second time and they're like, okay, I survived the first one.
Yeah.
that divorce, I can, anyway, I don't know. I have a lot of
I
theories.
think maybe their tolerance is less, like, because they're like, I don't want to do that twice. So once you're going down that road, you're like, oh no, detour. Early detour is probably, what it is. I think people marry for different reasons too. Sometimes people are afraid to do things on their own, financially, with their kids, so, if that's your key, then it's unlikely going to work,
Yeah. So your ex-husband was being verbally abusive and gaslighting you. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
I think it's very
and
fair.
Has that continued? And if it has, how do you deal with it differently?
It has continued. I actually found out a lot of things after I left, that would probably cause people to divorce, which are so low down on the ladder. For me, it really came from the love and respect, The rest of it, I probably could have worked around.
Yeah.
But essentially, I tried really hard to work together, and it's been spiteful the whole time. And my youngest is finally getting to 18. And I just am now no contact because I feel
with
my
him.
relationship. And I have my son, my ex-husband actually moved out of the country. So my daughter's an adult age now. And so he, I think he just couldn't handle the change of reputation. I'm not really even sure. I have no idea. He had dreams he wanted to fulfill, and they are in another country.
And they're in another country.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's it. And so my son's going to be 18. And so I'm leaving the relationship more primarily to them now, because my intrusion into, like, even my, being there at all, basically, I think complicates their relationship. So and triangulates things, and it's better off letting them have their own moments and have organic understanding of each other, not being deflected off of me.
Yeah. I think that's really wise. And I'm actually kind of working on the same thing, allowing my daughter and her father to figure it out, and
it's hard. Yeah.
So you said another thing that I think a lot of men do is that they might say to themselves, I'm just going to wait till my kids are out of high school and then I'll get divorced. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. In fact, I have spent hours, like going over, like, did I stay too long? Like, should I have left earlier?
Right. It's like putting your dog down, it's like, did I wait too long to do it? Was I,
did I
do everything?
Yeah. And honestly, I think we were all really, ragged at the end of this situation, but everyone's a lot stronger for it now. I can't speak for my ex-husband. I think he's having a good life, and his kids still love him very much. And I work really hard at, maintaining respectful interaction at all costs, which is why I really don't interact very much anymore, because it's
not respectful.
Because we'll have a normal time, and in each time that it gets nice, it'll get like worse. Like, it'll have to have a worse back.
Oh, what is that? I know, it's like, oh, you start to trust. Oh, look, he's being nice, and you kind of open the door, and then it's like getting shit on again. I know.
It's like, it's not, and it doesn't help the kids. So ultimately, it was really hard for my daughter. Like, she really loved her traditional life, and we struggled for a while. I mean, quietly struggled. She was loving, but she never came over. I mean, ever, and
over to you where you are now, or
exactly. Which is, only maybe 8 minutes from my old home. So, she was going by it every day. She was, there for the whole pandemic, and that's okay. We've come through it now, and I actually think it's paying off in spades, where she's really starting to see the choices as a woman, and she's becoming a woman, and proud of them, which, I just, you can't make that. You have to wait, and let people come to it. You can only speak your case so much. In fact, speaking your case sometimes puts you back in the crazy category. So you sometimes just have to let the story tell itself.
Yeah.
And
so
I'm lucky that I had the strength of my son, because he did come with me. They have a choice at a certain age. I think it's up to 14. And that is when we were breaking up. So, he did have a choice. And, I am very glad for that because I think we're in a good space for it. Yeah.
So do you think even though you weren't ready for it, the writing wasn't on the wall, or maybe it was on the wall, but you wanted to keep trying, right? Do you think it would have been better for your kids if you and your ex-husband had gotten divorced when they were younger?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's the
It's
thing.
an
Like,
impossible question.
It is because we did have a nice traditional life for a really long time. I think like a lot of families, it just creeps in slowly. I really can't point at the spot where it started to creep in. Maybe the last year or two was but those were the year or two that I had to prove that it couldn't be saved.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
all things in their time.
We're going to take a short break now to hear from our sponsor, Take Passage Coaching. This is still Mary, and I happen to be the owner and lead coach of Take Passage Coaching, and I'm thrilled I asked myself to be my own sponsor. Seriously, though, Take Passage Coaching is a trauma-informed transformational coaching practice that supports people who are ready to move from uncertainty and doubt to the ability to clarify what they expect from themselves. At Take Passage Coaching, I work with clients to help them look at their negative thoughts not as the messy parts of themselves to stuff away, but how to use those thoughts as fuel. I know you've probably heard all of the promises before, and you may have been working on your stuff for ages with not much progress. But one reason why Take Passage Coaching is different is that I celebrate all of your messy parts, the parts you're embarrassed about, the things you may consider weaknesses, and I help you to see them that they are all gifts and they are all strengths. So whether you're someone who has experienced trauma, and if you're human, you have, or are ready to do the scary things in life that you've been telling yourself you can't, Take Passage Coaching is ready to help you with the transition and change that you want. So go ahead and reach out to takepassagecoaching.com to book a free exploratory session and take good care. You were talking a little bit about your relationship with your daughter and how the divorce was hard for her, less so for your son.
I don't think it was less so for him. I think that
different.
She was more angry, maybe a little more angry. And he was a little more understanding. And some of that was probably from the fact she wasn't present. And he was enough to see that it wasn't, a welcoming situation, no matter what anyone said.
Right. This defining moment when you're sitting in the room with your husband and he's being verbally abusive and your daughter's there and it's kind of second nature and you go for a walk and you decide, okay, I'm done. You come back and you decide, okay, this is it. That moment, that decision, who do you think it's affected, good or bad, other than your kids and your ex-husband?
Well, one of the things that's kind of funny is I work with two women that I'm very close with. We do a lot of hours together. And the year that I divorced, they both got new diamond rings.
From their husbands.
Yes. So I think I made everyone a little nervous, and they all decided to reinforce, their commitment to their women a little bit, which was lovely.
Wow.
That was an interesting effect. I had another friend who was in a very toxic relationship, and I think she decided to leave her husband about 6 months after myself. And I never gave advice and said you should anything, because I don't believe in that. One needs to come to those things on their own.
Absolutely.
But I think, seeing me not crumble or seeing, the world not fall apart gave her the strength to do it.
Do you think you were, in general, happier day to day, less weight? That perhaps then now, like, I know it's hell to go through a divorce, but
no, it's been a long time. I was with my partner for 27 years and he was, I thought my best friend. So the beginning was really difficult. It was really hard for me to even I would fall asleep on the couch and I'd wake up and it would alarm me that I was sitting by myself. That took a really long time. Things like, buying too much food at the grocery store or making dinner that you're used to making because everyone else likes it, but you don't really like it that much. And then you realize 7 servings full.
All right. I don't have to eat this stuff anymore.
What is happening? So that was challenging. I think I was, in fetal position for a good 6 months. And it was an interesting thing for me too, because I have a nice place that I rent. A client and a friend of mine made a space really, it was like an in-law house on their property. And so, when he passed away, she moved into a nursing home and the house was available. So he made it available to me before I was really ready to move in case I needed to be by myself. And I took a weekend or two here and there, but it's a nice place, and it has some beautiful qualities. So even the few friends that I invited into my misery would always come in and be like, "Oh, like this is fine. You're fine.
You're doing okay because you have a nice house."
Exactly.
Like, not necessarily.
Say, oh, it's so good that eyes can't actually burn daggers into people. Because I stopped having anyone over because it was really difficult to understand that a view is not always enjoyable when you can't share it with like everyone in your life, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Challenging like that. So, you know, and now I see my place and I'm like, this is great. But it took a good 2+ years to see things for what they were.
That's a fascinating, I think that connects also to the, like, people don't really know what to do with divorced women or single women. And I remember when I was getting
in general. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you have a nice home and a nice view at your home, then it can't be as bad as if you're stuck in a shitty apartment.
Yeah, exactly. At least you're not, on the street or in a tent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, true, I have both my legs too, but it's not a great day.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard for people to identify with that. And I think especially because when people think about separating from their partner, they think about financial woes. You know, it's very modern for couples to separate and stay in the same house. Maybe, one lives on one floor, one lives on another, or sometimes people, I forget the word for it, but they'll have a house where like the care provider stays with the child or the children.
Oh, nesting.
There'll be another apartment nest. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like crazy. Why would you put another place between the two of you? I mean, cooperation.
Yeah, right. Not to be judgmental, but like you got to have some buku bucks to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Well, on top of it, if you could cooperate that well, maybe you should stay married.
Yeah.
It's a weird modern thing. So for people to see a woman who isn't destitute by themselves, or even maybe managing to care for their kids, like they're like, oh, you're fine. I don't,
you don't need my help
for that. Like,
And I think that actually really can play against, I'll say, single people. Like if you appear strong and confident and you got your shit together, like she doesn't really need our help. And it's not true. It's like, we still want to be invited to the parties. We still,
every woman identifies with everyone telling you how great you look when you've lost 15 misery pounds, and it's like, hey, but I'm eating rice,
Yeah. I can't eat. Yeah.
And, that's a weird thing. I think that happens to women all the time, you feel awful and they tell you look great,
I know. You're like, but I had to go through hell to look like this.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with limiting.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah.
So it sounds like your moment of deciding to get divorced encouraged some people to kind of renew their vows, and encouraged some other people to actually be like, oh, I'm pretty miserable also, or whatever their thought process was.
Yeah. It made them
reflect. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. What would have happened if you hadn't made that step?
Things would be worse. I don't think my son would be in a good place. I would have had to go through a pandemic and talk about isolation. There wouldn't be anywhere to go.
Yeah.
Even walking too much would have been frowned upon,
Yeah.
So I don't think I would have been well. I don't know what would have happened, but because when the pandemic started, I'd only been 6 months into the separation. So when the lockdown started, and, I would joke with my friend from, my best friend from Philly. And I would say, like the government is really concerned that I'm alone a lot and they think I need more money. I'm like, sweet. Because I've literally been doing that for a while.
That's so funny.
I know. Right. Like, oh, so now I'm isolated.
Yeah.
I found it kind of humorous, but it was almost like the world took a pause with me, and I got to hide some of my, ugly cry and all those things that you just don't want to share with the world. And so, I was blessed that I left when I did.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. I mean, it's not fascinating. It's tragic. So when the pandemic hit, I was doing victim advocacy work, and I was in contact with a lot of women who were victims of domestic violence, but were still with their partners. And when the pandemic hit, the communication stopped because they're stuck in a hotel room, or they're stuck in a home, their apartment with their abusive partner.
Their phone might be taken. Yeah.
Right. Even they couldn't answer phone calls. They couldn't, it was so It was so awful.
While the rest of us were resigning to the fact that we weren't going to see people and we weren't going to have fun, they were like, I'm losing my lifelines. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm so glad that you didn't have to go through that.
No,
right?
me too.
You didn't have to be stuck in a home with somebody who was being verbally abusive to you,
No. And, we still had our moments and, like there was still, ways of communication, but that's within your control. You can turn the phone off and you can, lock the door. And that's really helpful. I was really blessed. And I honestly haven't taken it for granted for a minute.
Yeah. Can you talk about, if somebody's like, oh my God, I've got to get out of my marriage, but just doesn't know how or when, like, can you talk about advice you might give to somebody about how you know when you know? Well, and I know it's different for everybody, right?
Yeah, I think you really need to check your boundaries. I think when we're struggling with a bad marriage, we're often constantly pushing, like our boundaries are being pushed, our comfort levels are being pushed. And it trickles in, I think. So they get fuzzier and fuzzier, those boundaries. So reestablishing, writing down your boundaries, keeping your stuff clean. Like, I think people get really overwhelmed at the thought of like, oh my gosh, our bank accounts, our credit cards, our home, like we have everything together, our debt, our like, what do I even owe? Like, what are my subscriptions? I mean, right down to like, oh my gosh, we pay for Netflix twice. Like what's happening? Like starting the process of that so that you don't let the overwhelming like facts of life change your decision, because life is short and
life is short. Yeah.
You really don't want to spend your whole life because you're afraid of living in a 1-bedroom apartment, because it doesn't really matter as long you can make almost anything a home as long as you're safe and well there. I mean, you can't be happy all the time, but the chance of happiness is a lot greater and it leads to more all the time. So I would say checking your finances, checking your head, like, when you think about separating, where do you go mentally? Like, what are you most afraid of? And research that.
Yeah.
Because knowledge is power. And that way, if you decide to stay because your partner has made you a priority, then it's because you want to stay and not because you're afraid of what that would look like, to discover what your credit report looks like,
Yeah, I think what you just said, like when you think about divorce, where does your head go? Where's your biggest fear? And work through that, even put it on paper or,
exactly.
If it's, I'm afraid of being alone.
What does it mean? Yeah. How would I handle being alone? How would I prepare being alone? Because honestly, I'm not proud to say, like, I was so scared to be alone for a really long time. I slept with a nightlight. I mean, if I slept at all, I mean, the pandemic masks were my friend.
Why is that?
Because I was covered, I barely slept, honestly, like I got better. I mean, and now I don't need any of that stuff. And things like that really were like insurmountable now, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about. When we're in fight or flight, these things are huge and they're not, they're not telling the truth all the time. Some things are huge and some things are just things,
some things are just things that we have stories we tell ourselves, some things that, we've, to no fault on anyone, we've made up, or, fear is often false. Right. Fear is like
anxiety is meant to keep us safe. But if you're in fight or flight all the time, you're no longer it's no longer accurate. Plus, if your heart rate's up all the time, I learned that, going to marriage counseling that, if your heart rate's over an 85, you cannot reasonably make decisions. You can't have a reasonable conversation.
Right. And your cortisol levels shoot up and all these other things happen. Yeah.
And when you think your life is falling apart, like, I'm not sure anybody's under 85 very much, Yeah. So, you need to keep that in mind, when making decisions.
Yeah.
Anxiety can lie. So preparation and education and knowledge don't.
Yeah.
So lean on those.
Yeah. In the very beginning, when we first started talking, you said something like what you were talking about choosing to make this decision. And you said something about, I needed to be respectful to myself and my kids, my family. And I love that. It's like, these really hard decisions are often a form of respect for ourselves. And so knowing you took that step, what do you think your life is going to look like in 5 years now that you have created that respect for yourself and your family?
I just honestly, it's crazy. I feel younger now than I did 5 years ago by far.
Oh,
And it does happen. And I also just feel like I'm choosing people and relationships differently. I've really chosen to kind of walk through the fire and not avoid it because there's a lot to be learned, about my own decisions, my own
nice.
bad choices, and honestly about things that really are out of your hands that you really shouldn't own as like, guilt or whatever that piece is.
Yeah.
But I think in 5 years, I'm feeling pretty solid. I'm going to be better than even now.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Bright, shining light, bringing joy to everyone who sits in your chair. So nice. And what about your kids?
Oh, my kids are doing great. I think they're coming to their own conclusions about how things went without being pushed in any real direction, which I'm proud of. I think in the beginning, my ex-husband put a lot of pressure on everybody to be their support, to be his support and which is really hard to remain neutral when you see someone you love, struggling. But in hindsight, I think like everybody is stronger for knowing that, we're still a family unit, even if we're not married, it's still my family, even whether we can talk or not. So, I think that unconditional love is just a positive, it teaches you that you can be respectful to yourself and you can still love someone without compromising your own boundaries.
Right on, sister. Yeah.
Not easy, but you can do it.
Yeah.
And that's it. We're all walking on this earth on our own, and we hope for good partners and good, companionship. But if we don't have that strength in ourselves, we're unlikely to find it.
Yeah. And how do you cultivate the strength? That's a rhetorical question. I mean, how does one cultivate the strength? That's I don't
nurturing
know.
yourself. Nurturing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think,
Being
like
honest
being
with yourself.
honest. I think like radical honesty, like really looking at why you make the decisions that you do and accepting them, like because there's really no wrong answers.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're maniacal, and then you should check that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like just the honesty and, loving yourself and forgiving yourself. I think the more I do those things, it's amazing. It's like I don't really need the same words from other people, and nor do the words that they put out affect me quite the same.
Yeah.
Which probably would have made my marriage different anyway.
Yeah.
I can't say I could have changed those behaviors of his, but I certainly could have changed the way I took those feelings on. And that won't happen again.
So good. The loving yourself. I mean, I get that. And I think a lot of people struggle with like, well, what does that actually mean? What does it mean loving myself? Like not caring what other people think? I don't know. You don't have to answer that, but I think that's a big question.
It's acceptance. I think it's just overall acceptance,
So to wrap our interview up, if you could sum up what your reason was, like why did you do this? Why did you choose this?
Because honestly, I didn't even do it for myself. I did it for my kids. Because if you're really going to break a cycle, then, participating in things just to keep things together, that's not breaking a cycle. That's just not divorcing.
Yeah. So your why was partially I wanted to break a cycle for my children.
Absolutely.
Good for you.
And redeem myself.
Redeem yourself.
I'm leaking.
You're leaking. It's okay. It looks like you picked up a bath towel.
Yeah, it's kitchen towel. But basically, I think on some level, I did feel like I let my kids down. And I think originally it was because I wanted to stay married, but then I realized that this is the crucial point of the defining moment, is that all that time I was really just kind of not giving them the lesson that it doesn't have to, things don't always have to work out to be right, and tolerating bad stuff to hold on to a dream that it's not right. So I just felt like I gave him some wrong messaging, and I wanted to fix that without, slandering anyone, if that makes sense. Like it's not like because he was so wrong, but because a person deserves this.
That was beautiful. How profound what you said, that it doesn't have to work out to be right. And it worked out a different way. Wow.
It did. And it's still right. I mean, my children, are amazing. So like, again, where's the line? Like, should it have been this year? Should it have been that year? We were supposed to be a family. So that's supposed to be, but you can't sacrifice yourself you can still be a family. It just shapes differently.
Absolutely. It's a different working out. It's a different right. And I held on to a similar thought when I was going through divorce, like, wait, we're supposed to be whitewater rafting with our kids and we're supposed to be doing all these things with our kids together as a family. Yeah. And I held on to that image so tight. Well, not that tight because I got divorced when my kids were 2 and 4, but, but like,
you need to,
yeah. And it was just this, it's this kind of made up thing that was supposed to happen in the future.
Yeah.
That, oh my God, what if that doesn't happen?
It's almost a disservice. It's sort of like creating a perfect world for your kids. Like, and your kids get all A's and they never get drunk and they never stay up late. And then they go to college and they're like, they can't handle, a D and they can't handle, drinking. The fact that any of it, because things are hard and sometimes we screw up. So in a way, like, it's a disservice to show like that, being over a perfectionist or even just that you should just keep taking like misery just to be a perfectionist. Like that's a disservice we do to our, friends, family, our children, mostly our children, because, that's what love looks like. And you can be unconditional and forgive people, but it doesn't mean you have to, be a doormat. And I think that's super important to have those boundaries. I think if people were clear about our boundaries, we wouldn't kind of wind up in these situations, gets fuzzy.
Yeah. You're so wise. You're so wise. Quick-witted and wise. I mean, what a great combo.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much.
Taking the time to listen to my story.
Oh my gosh. No, it's so important, I think, for men and women to hear. Right. It's like, how do you know when you know, and like, how do you almost prepare for it? And I think most importantly, how are we most respectful to ourselves? And I'm so happy that you chose to be really respectful for yourself and your kids.
Thank you.
And I know it's scary and hard, and you rocked it.
Thanks. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah. Glad to do it. It was an honor.
This has been Our Defining Moments with Mary McClements. I'm back next week with more stories of moments in time that changed someone's life forever. Please rate and review the show and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a defining moment and want to share, head over to the Our Defining Moment website at ourdefiningmoments.com and click on Share a Moment. I'm always interested in people's stories, and I may feature you on the podcast.